Ahoy mates, I'm Zolanius and welcome to my den. Today I'm doing a review of Dying Light, as promised, and also have a little announcement. Starting from today, I won't be doing daily streams and thus videos, but instead will do them every 2 or 3 days, so I can catch up to my life. Whilst one would think that being unemployed means basically infinite time, it's not really the case, and it turns out that doing streams daily whilst trying to improve your artistic skills and working on and playing TTRPG system and forum-based strategy games, whilst also trying to have some time to catch up to IRL stuff, aka geopolitical bullshitarian shit. Yeah, this results in severe burnout. So, I don't know if my productivity will increase by allowing myself to focus on one topic at a time, but at least I need to try. So, now on to the review of the best zombie game ever, according to some folks who are clearly biased. So, Dying Light is a first-person zombie masher with a semi-complex fighting system similar to its predecessor Dead Island, parkour elements heavily inspired by Mirror's Edge, crafting system inherited from Dead Island, once again, and survival elements tied to the in-game time that has been in use for ages, like in Minecraft for example. So as you can see, the title went with a wide gameplay loop and also inherits a lot of elements from its predecessors and other games made before it, none of these being bad design choices per se. However, quite a lot of games nowadays go this route as well, however without proper execution and synergy between these mechanics, they will end up like a steaming mess, such as this game. Now for starters, previously I bashed on the game's performance issues and how they affect the gameplay extremely negatively since the player will enter slow-mo and everything around them acts choppy or even outpaces the player's actions, creating situations like a zombie hitting them before or after they were within their reach, Crane not reacting to buttons pressed, and falling off ledges instead of grabbing onto them, etc. This, however, is only partly true due to the streaming and recording software I used, OBS, which was killing performance. After the stream I checked on the game again and it runs significantly better at the same settings as before. This, however, doesn't mean the game is well optimized though, since my rig is actually significantly over the recommended specifications, being a machine built for 2019 standards, whilst the average rig back in 2015, when the game was released, was obviously not even close to them. This stems from the fact that the game uses superfluous visual effects inherent to the base graphics, such as stupid lens flare, haze effects, dynamic or at least semi-dynamic texture mapping, visible when bashing skulls, for example, etc. And also heavily relying on high-quality animations and ragdoll effects whilst populating the city with large quantities of infected. On top of this, there are also many more visual enhancements that make the game more photorealistic, mainly by making its lagging so hard that you can appreciate every single detail whilst the game loads the next fucking frame. This can be seen in my first stream of the game, where I lowered the graphics to almost minimum and deal with the lagging, and only achieving mediocre results. Then on my 10th-ish stream, where I lower viewing distance to absolute minimum to no avail, as the overpass still lags like hell. Now there is an argument to get a better rig or that the game was made for consoles anyway, on which they usually don't have this issue, supposedly at least. However, the game was obviously made with PC port in mind since the graphics update from yogurt to postcard quality, and whilst graphics have limited use in helping immersion, detailed environments and high interactability, hard word, affects it much more. No, high-end graphics are marketing tools, and while some folks might like to buy very expensive postcard generators for $60, such as streamers nowadays, for example, the primary function of a game is to be played, and not to be an artistic creation or something. Also not to make me fucking spit all over my keyboard. This means graphics are secondary to enjoyment and gameplay flow, so effects that tank performance or hinder the game player in-game, such as overblown lighting effects or suppression effects blinding them mid-combat, or UI elements that are hard to see, like the goddamn fucking health bar, or straight up disappearing, like the throwables icons and the amounts, so they are not in the way of visuals, are in fact hurtful to the quality of the game. Another stupid design choice that were probably implemented to sell the environment better are the uninterruptible animations, both on the players and the enemy sides. Players' animations take too long and don't provide the invisibility frames while being easily executed or misplaced, as most of them use the same buttons, such as when you accidentally do a power strike with your one-hander because you had left click too long, and now in a 1.5 second animation, which you yourself cannot stop, but the enemies in your periphery can utilize it against you. On the other hand, if an enemy is doing an animation, like the grabbing or biting animation, that can override the player's retreat action or even an attack action that are already connected. To make matters worse, some enemies flail around even after death, which surely looks good but hurts the combat just as much if not even worse, considering that the player now has to retreat from a foe they just defeated in order to not get hit by a technical invisible corpse. Invincible corpse. I can talk sometimes. Next up we have the combat mechanics, since we already brought them up with the animations. The base combat loop of bashing the enemies with various melee weapons and the occasional throwables are complemented with environmental damage dealers, area deniers, different enemy types, critical hits, and special moves. However, instead of synergizing with each other, they actively clash or are underutilized in favor of others. Explosive both grenades and gas mask tanks and propane tanks found in the world make loud noises that summon very fast and annoying enemies that don't draw better loot, even though their presence facilitates a doctrine change on how Crane is to do combat. This means players will actively avoid these low yield tactics, especially in light to the fact that zombies can and will just spawn behind Crane without a notice. That also makes van hunting difficult as they are mostly in open terrain. Area deniers such as various puddles and spiked furniture allows the player to insta-kill zombies caught up in them. However, the former denies area both to the enemy and the player who utilizes parkour moves and such need a large area to deal with strong or numerous foes. Whilst the spiked furniture should be synergy with kicking, but the base kick is so weak that even direct hit to the head only makes the target stagger a few steps backwards, and the dropkick only works with a sprint jump, so it can be used reliably mid-combat. Kicking in general is lackluster, they don't do much damage, they barely suppress the singular target they are hitting, and they are evaded by virals and survivors, whilst goons and the militia just straight up ignore them. And to take too long to perform as well, to what they are worth at least. Nothing like in Dark Messiah, where they were the best regarded mechanic for allowing quick and satisfying way of dealing with mobs, nor the bashing ability in Left 4 Dead that allowed the breathing room for the survivors. The only kick in the game that is reliably helpful and thus overutilized is the Stomp ability that lets the player insta-kill human-sized opponents that are significantly lower than him, like if they are not on the ground or if Crane is on a car and they are surrounding it. This actually is a strategy the wiki suggests, climbing a car and using the stomp skill to thin the herd, but is also a very boring and monotonous tactic that doesn't provide much satisfaction and actively intensifies the gameplay that doesn't utilize resources, of which there is a plenty around Haran, even, especially on higher difficulties, which will end up in the player having a literal arsenal of weapons they don't use because headkicking is just financially better choice. The other special moves are only worth mentioning to shine a light on their clashing executions. Since the game doesn't use much buttons for combat, namely E, G, Shift, Alt, Space, Control, and the two mouse clicks, moves that have nothing to do with each other use the same buttons, such as the ground pound being falling and holding control, and falling roll being falling and pressing control again, which can make Crane either break his legs or fall amidst enemies without hurting or staggering them. There is also the constant vaulting problem, since a lot of moves require Crane to be airborne or press space, but if he does it too close to a zombie, then he will vault them instead, meaning a flying king into a burning oil puddle can easily turn into Crane jumping in it himself. All of this could be solved if the developers make buttons correspond to actions, like escape types being connected to space, while staggering moves use E and the damaging ones use mouse clicks. Lastly, they messed up critical hits so much that the players will actively try to avoid them, since instead of extra damage or at least a very crunchy finishing move, it provides Crane with a zombie that is available for a finishing sequence from the front once they reach level 12 in combat skills, meaning it's both useless in the first half of the game and also makes enemies scream in pain that attract virals and volatiles, so bonks in the night in hope for sneak kills are not an option. As a bonus, they also messed up the weapon ranges, as Crane hits zombos the same distance with an arm-long baseball bat and a palm-sized prison shiv, and zombos themselves sometimes outrange Crane with their sucker punches. Long one-handed weapons like bats, axes, picks, and machetes should have twice the range, whilst two-handers should have thrice. Two-handers also need a substantially larger damage, since the attack take twice the amount of time and stamina to perform, ergo misses happen more often, yet they have just about 15% increase in dealt damage. Twice the damage should be minimum, but one could also argue that due to higher miss chance, it should be even more. As our third topic, let's talk about the parkour elements. Mentioned before, the developers should have just straight up nabbed all the game mechanics from Mirror's Edge, as the version this game has feels incomplete, since Crane can find himself in similar situations as Faith does, but doesn't have the tools to solve them. The most glaring problem is the ledge mechanic. It is very hard to tell which comically small inclination can be grabbed, and which obvious ledges are actually just for decoration. Mirror's Edge have a fuck ton of 90-degree inclinations, plus important parkour objects were highlighted bright red against the usual white or grey environments using runner vision. In contrast, Dying Light has barely noticeable in-game yellow and white markers in and around the tower made out of grey concrete that basks in orange light, whereas the rest of the city is unmarked. This once again help with the immersion and all, but make the parkour elements that much harder to pull off, since video games are not following real-life logic. And what we see as ledges or objects to grab, the game counts as mere decor and obstacles. A solution would be to highlight either all available ledges with a constant in color, maybe green, or give the player the option to specify a ledge they are going for, letting Crane grab onto it if he is close enough, though this latter would also need a highlighter that needs to show if he can make it to the ledge with his current direction and velocity. Would be a very useful addition to the survivor senses, since they are seldom used on higher difficulties, as they don't highlight loot anymore on those. Another solution would be just to make Crane automatically grab onto ledges whilst he is in falling, since most times there aren't any random stuff he could grab instead of what the player is aiming for. This would make the game a bit easier, but it could be implemented into a difficulty system instead of bullshit enemy health and damage modifiers that are just straight up lazy by the fucking by. What is also missing from the game that they could have stolen from Mirror's Edge is the player-induced slow motion and the disarming feature. Once again, these features would make the game much easier, but since in combat or worse during a pursuit the player needs to make split-second decisions and moves, having that extended to a few actual seconds would make both mechanics much less stressful. The bullshit blocks done by Rice's men, on the other hand, are just straight up annoying. So either remove that skill of theirs or just allow the player to remove their weapons. How the game currently is gives the player little to no incentive to engage in proper confrontations, so they either do the Molotov exploit or just avoid fights altogether to go grind loot somewhere else. This is a zombie killing game, first and foremost, and not a survival horror, so overpowered enemies and non-confrontational tactics make the game less enjoyable. There is also the problem of making the parkour moves unlockable through the leveling system. Forward roll is paramount to have since the beginning of the game, as fall damage is the number one key roll, or at least the most annoying thing that players experience during parkour, but it's put behind a level 9 of the agility tree almost halfway through it. The escape skill, whilst not being parkour move per se, are in the same agility tree, and everybody can agree that it's the most important skill to make it easier to deal with the very annoying biting mechanic that makes quick escapes from hordes very hard. It's also behind level 9 once again, and needs at least 2 skill points to actually help. Slide and dodge are also staple parkour moves that are very much needed both during pursuits and regular combat, but they are unlockable at least on level 3 and 2 respectively. So the feeling of an incomplete system fades a little bit earlier. Then it comes to warning, which is just straight up sucks. First, it's behind agility level 13, almost, not even almost, actually over halfway through. Then it's tied to the jump key that will prioritize grabbing onto ledges instead of doing the special move. And lastly, it can be used to properly wall run Prince of Persia style, nor to quickly climb up between two tall buildings, as the wall jump can only be used twice normally, which doesn't let Crane go too high before needing to grab onto something. Basically, there is not much use to it, and having one of the most iconic parkour moves be this weak, and also behind a very big grind wall, just speaks how much incompetent the designers were, especially if we consider the grappling hook, which is not just behind survival level 12, but also makes parkour obsolete. Whilst it has its limitation, of course, it transforms the usual mobility loop from climbing up high, then jumping from rooftop to rooftop, to Spider-Man ziplining yourself up to a tall building, then targeting the next one quite far away, jumping a little bit till it restarts, then rinse and repeat. And don't get me wrong, I love this feature more than any other in the game, to be perfectly honest, but it's because it allows me to not engage in the game's parkour mechanics, which speaks volumes about how badly they were executed. All in all, they wanted to make Dying Light be basically Mirror's Edge with zombies, but what they ended up with instead is Dead Island with increased verticality. Our fourth and last topic is the survival aspect of the game, namely the crafting system and the nighttime gameplay shift, both of being implemented for marketing purposes only. Like basically the rest of the game, to be perfectly honest. The crafting is the same from the island. Find random stuff and make them into weapon mods and throwables. All of these are exact copies of each other, applying bleeding, poisoning, burning, or shocking effects to the weapons besides a flat damage increase, or the durability decrease. The weapons themselves are also RPG-ified, increasing in damage alongside of player level, but not in their appearance, besides the graffitis, of course, or other mechanics, whilst the enemies also increase their health points to be in accordance with the weapon's damage. This means the player needs to constantly upgrade their arsenal, ditching favored weapons each level up to not get behind the increasing enemy health, basically punishing them for advancing their levels. And besides that, both weapons and crafting materials are color-coded to denote how rare they are, which for weapons just means damage, max repairs, and max upgrades increase, whilst for crafting items, it just shows how much different types there are in the game. Gray items being the most numerous, then green ones, and blue, purple, and orange ones have only one item type per color, meaning that high-tier weapon mods will need Nokia phones and power cables, even if they are providing toxic and bleeding effects. Whilst the legendary bolter tissue is used to craft, I kid you not, pistol silencers, ruining any semblance of team whatsoever. Speaking of legendary, orange weapons are only found either by shops, which use dollars even though it's an Arabic country, or by increasing the difficulty level to maximum and going out during night to open hard and very hard locks, which will not just force the player to exit their comfort zone for diminishing returns, but is also the singular use for the nighttime mechanics in the entirety of the game. Nighttime airdrops cannot be stolen by racism, but they still only provide red cross packages that can be graded in quarantine zones much more efficiently, so there is no reason to go for those, nor is there any reason to go after bolters, since the tissue they drop has very limited uses only, maybe the silence guns, and a few developer weapons that are just not worth the effort, to be perfectly honest. Volatile hunting is also A suicide on low levels, and B, they don't drop much more XP or loot than regular enemies, so once again, not worth it. Otherwise, nighttime is supposed to be when the player becomes the prey, constantly pursued by volatiles and being on high alert, but there is no real reason to get pursued besides a very chancy grind for not too much agility points, nor you get anything from sneaking around them, which with their barely functioning noticing system, they literally cannot see flashlights tagging them, nor they give a damn about if you yell in the vicinity of them when doing powerful moves that makes Crane yell for some reason. It's more worthwhile to just go to the nearest safe house and sleep the night over, since you still get survivor XP for doing it. And if you don't mind sitting on a high place until the 7 minutes of nighttime pass, you can get an even higher amount of survival XP. This could have been solved by making airdrops more significant, possibly by making them a way to get high tier gear without needing to change the difficulty and mess with locks in the night, or at least give grenades instead of fucking flares. By making the sneaking around enemies award either survivor or agility points, ever increasing amounts dependent on the distance and the enemy headcount. By making bolter tissue a sought after item with more useful crafting recipes, such as a longer range zombie lure, longer lasting and more potent potions, a camouflage potion that lasts for a reasonable amount of time, like at least as long as actual camouflage, or preferably twice. And by making volatiles drop high tier items, or at least give 10 times the XP they currently do, since attacking one at night will already summon his friends over, so it's gonna be a hard fight anyway. But no. Instead of that, you either engage in a lackluster stealth game, run for your life for a little bit of agility points, attack VIP zombies and their burly guards for limited use crafting items, or just say fuck it and not engage with this BS at all. There is of course more to bash on this game, like the cookie cutter story or the BS quicktime event ending, but enough time was wasted on this hate piece, and I'd rather show how the game failed at the stuff they were supposed to deliver than what else they messed up. Dying Light failed to deliver the survival aspects with their token crafting and nighttime mechanics. They failed to deliver the parkour aspects with their incomplete and clashing moveset. They also failed with the combat aspect, using their environment prioritized animations, and once again, clashing moveset. And lastly, they failed to deliver an enjoyable game by focusing all their time, money, and talent to make something that looks good in the adverts and nothing else. The only thing they can say in their defense is that the game is better than Dead Island, though that is comparing shit to industrial waste, in my opinion. And there are people calling this the best zombie game ever. This barely working, marketing-oriented piece of crap that didn't even deliver on its promises of choices mattering, being able to move around seamlessly in the world, or even just half of the features they showcased in the 2014 trailer. These people fucking bite the PR schlong hard, and either haven't played enough games to know better, or just want to justify the $60 they spent on this crappy status symbol. For me though, this was a burden that I took on once again for views and followers. And to be perfectly honest, it wasn't worth it. Hope at least the hours I put into making this video was. Anyway, thank you for watching, I was Alanius, and I'm hoping to see you back in my den with something more palatable. Take care.